The conference room on the 42nd floor smelled of leather and anxiety. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city stretched endlessly, buildings stacked like broken promises under a gray October sky. Inside, 6 men in tailored suits sat around a table of polished mahogany, their faces carefully neutral, their hands folded over documents they hadn't signed. The air conditioning hummed a monotonous tune that made everything feel colder than it was. Marcus Chen stood at the head of the table. His presentation clicker gripped so tightly his knuckles had gone white. He'd been talking for 20 minutes, his voice steady despite the sweat gathering at his collar. Behind him, a projection screen displayed charts and graphs in blues and greens, market projections, profit margins, growth trajectories. Numbers that should have been convincing, numbers that weren't working. The 3 Japanese investors sat on the left side of the table, their expressions unreadable. Takahashi-san, the eldest, wore wire-rimmed glasses that caught the fluorescent light. Beside him, Nakamura-san occasionally made notes in a leather portfolio, his pen moving with precise, economical strokes. The third, Yoshida-san, simply watched, his gaze moving between Marcus and the screen with the patience of someone who had sat through 1,000 presentations just like this one. On the right side sat Marcus's team, David Reeves, the CFO, whose cologne was giving everyone a headache, Sarah Kim, head of operations, who kept adjusting her pearl necklace, and James Whitmore, the company's founder, whose legacy this partnership was supposed to secure. James was 73, his hair silver, his hands spotted with age. He'd built Morrison & Associates from nothing 40 years ago, and now he was watching it teeter on the edge of obsolescence. Marcus advanced to the next slide. As you can see, our entry into the Asian market represents not just growth, but transformation. With Takahashi Industries' manufacturing capabilities and our distribution network, Takahashi-san raised a hand, barely a movement, but everyone stopped breathing. He spoke in Japanese, his tone polite but distant, and Nakamura-san translated, "Mr. Takahashi asks if you have secured the necessary permits for the Yokohama facility." "We're in the final stages," Marcus said, trying to sound confident. "Our legal team assures us that—" "Assures." Nakamura-san didn't translate this time. He simply repeated the word in English, letting it hang in the air like smoke. The meeting had been dying for the past hour, slowly suffocating under the weight of cultural distance and unspoken doubts. Marcus could feel it slipping away, this partnership they'd worked 8 months to arrange. 8 months of calls, emails, revised proposals, 8 months of James's hopes pinned on this one afternoon. "Perhaps," Yoshida-san said in careful English, "we should take a break. Consider the materials further." It was the corporate equivalent of, "We'll call you." Everyone in the room knew it. "Of course," James said, rising slowly. His voice carried decades of negotiation, but also exhaustion. "We have luncheon arranged, a private dining room downstairs. Perhaps we can continue our discussion in a more relaxed setting." The investors stood, bowing slightly. The Americans stood, not quite knowing how deeply to bow in return. They'd watched YouTube videos, read articles on business etiquette, but knowledge and comfort were different countries. The private dining room was on the 3rd floor, a space Morrison & Associates reserved for exactly these occasions. The walls were hung with abstract art that cost more than most people's cars, and the table was set with white linens and crystal that caught the light like trapped stars. In the corner, a small bar held bottles of wine selected by someone who understood vintage years and terroir. The atmosphere should have been intimate, conducive to the kind of conversation that turned business associates into partners. Instead, it felt like a museum after hours, beautiful, expensive, and profoundly lonely. Marcus sat between Sarah and David, watching as the investors settled into their chairs with the same careful neutrality they'd shown upstairs. James sat at the head of the table, playing the gracious host, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Menus were distributed, leather-bound and heavy. The sommelier appeared, explained the wine selections, and disappeared like a ghost. "The ribeye is excellent here," James offered, "dry-aged for 40 days. Takahashi-san nodded politely, but didn't open his menu. Neither did his colleagues. They sat with their hands in their laps, waiting. Though for what, Marcus couldn't say. The server appeared, a young woman in the standard uniform, black slacks, white button-down shirt, black apron tied neatly at the waist. She carried a small notepad and wore her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She couldn't have been more than 25, maybe younger. Her name tag read Maya in simple block letters. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," she said, her voice pleasant but professional. "Can I start you with drinks? We have a selection of—" Takahashi-san looked up at her, and something shifted in his posture. He said something in Japanese, quietly, almost under his breath. It wasn't directed at her, just a comment to Nakamura-san, the kind of aside people make when they think no one else can understand. Maya's hand paused over her notepad for just a fraction of a second. Then she smiled, and when she spoke, the words flowed like water over stones, natural and clear. She responded in Japanese, not the textbook phrases from a language class, but something more fluid, more authentic. The syllables had texture, a particular rhythm that made Takahashi-san's eyebrows lift. The entire room went still. Nakamura-san leaned forward slightly. He asked a question, his tone curious now rather than formal. Maya answered, and her accent, Marcus couldn't place it exactly, but it had a specific quality, a regional flavor. She gestured with her hands as she spoke, the notepad forgotten, her professional distance momentarily dissolved. Yoshida-san laughed, an actual laugh, the first genuine emotion Marcus had seen from any of them all day. He said something that made Maya's smile widen, and she responded with what sounded like gentle teasing. The three Japanese men exchanged glances, and in that moment, the temperature in the room changed. The museum became a living space. Takahashi-san spoke at length, his formal business demeanor cracking to reveal something warmer underneath. Maya listened, nodding, occasionally interjecting. At one point, she touched her heart with her hand, a gesture of sincerity, and said something that made all three investors nod solemnly. Marcus looked at Sarah, who looked at David, who looked at James. None of them had any idea what was being said, but they could all feel the shift, like weather changing, like winter giving way to something softer. After what felt like both seconds and hours, Maya turned back to the table at large, switching to English seamlessly. "Gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. Takahashi-san was asking about my background. I'll take your drink orders now." But as she wrote down requests for scotch and wine and sparkling water, Marcus noticed that Takahashi-san was looking at her with something approaching warmth. When she left to place the order, the three investors immediately began talking among themselves, in low, rapid Japanese, their earlier reserve completely gone. James caught Marcus's eye and gave the smallest shrug, a gesture that said, "I have no idea what just happened, but don't question it." When Maya returned with the drinks on a silver tray, distributing them with practiced efficiency, Nakamura-san spoke to her again. This time, Marcus caught a word he recognized, Tokyo. "Yes," Maya said, smiling. "I lived in Tokyo for 3 years, in Setagaya-ku, near Shimokitazawa Station." More Japanese followed, and this time Maya laughed, a sound that seemed to unlock something in the room. She explained something, her hands painting pictures in the air, and the investors nodded with recognition, with shared understanding. Takahashi-san's face had transformed. The careful business mask was gone, replaced by the expression of someone remembering home. "Your accent," Yoshida-san said in English, clearly for the benefit of the Americans. "It is very good, very specific. Shitamachi dialect, yes?" "My landlady in Tokyo," Maya explained, setting down the last glass. "She was 78 years old, and she adopted me like a stray cat. Taught me to speak properly," she'd say. "Not that NHK News Japanese," she'd tell me. "Real Japanese, the way real people talk." Takahashi-san said something, and Maya's expression softened. "Yes," she replied in English, though clearly responding to his Japanese question. "I miss it very much. The sounds of the neighborhood in the morning, the smell of grilled fish from the restaurant downstairs, the way the light looked through the paper screens in my apartment." She paused, seeming to remember where she was, at work, in a private dining room, surrounded by men in expensive suits. "But I should take your orders. Are you ready, or would you like a few more minutes?" What followed was not the usual mechanical recitation of menu items and special preparations. Instead, Nakamura-san asked Maya what she recommended, and she considered seriously before answering. She asked them questions. Had they tried certain types of American cuisine before? How did they feel about spice levels? When Takahashi-san mentioned he had dietary restrictions, she didn't just list safe options. She suggested modifications, explained ingredients, offered to speak with the chef personally. The conversation wove between English and Japanese, and even though Marcus couldn't understand half of it, he could feel the walls coming down. The investors were relaxed now, leaning back in their chairs. Yoshida-san was telling a story that involved considerable hand gestures, and Maya was listening with genuine interest, asking questions that made him elaborate further. At one point, Takahashi-san pulled out his phone and showed her a picture of what appeared to be his grandchildren. Maya exclaimed with delight, asking their ages, their names. He scrolled through several photos, and she made appropriate comments that required no translation, the universal language of admiring small children. When she finally left to place their orders, the silence that followed was completely different from the silence upstairs in the conference room. This one was comfortable, warm, filled with possibility. James cleared his throat. "Well," he said carefully, "that was unexpected." Takahashi-san turned to him, and when he spoke through Nakamura-san's translation, his tone had changed entirely. "Your staff is well chosen, Morrison-san. That young woman, she understands something important. She has lived in Japan, truly lived, not just visited. She knows our heart." "She showed respect," Yoshida-san added in English. "Real respect, not business respect. Different thing." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "We believe," he said carefully, "that understanding goes beyond just business terms. Cultural connection matters." It was the kind of corporate speak he'd been spouting all morning. But now, in the wake of whatever had just happened with Maya, the words felt less hollow. The investors nodded, and Takahashi-san said something lengthy in Japanese that Nakamura-san translated in pieces. "Mr. Takahashi says that this morning, upstairs, he had doubts. Not about your numbers. Your numbers are good. But numbers are easy. Many companies have good numbers. The question is always, do we understand each other? Can we work together, not just today, but through difficulties, through misunderstandings, through cultural differences that will certainly arise?" He paused, glancing at Takahashi-san, who gestured for him to continue. "When that young woman spoke to us just now in Shitamachi dialect, this is not something you learn in school. This is something you learn by living with people, by being accepted into a community, by sitting on the floor of a tiny apartment and sharing rice balls while an old woman tells you how things really are. Mr. Takahashi grew up in that part of Tokyo. So did I. That dialect, it is the sound of home. Yoshida-san picked up his glass of scotch, examining it in the light. In our culture, he said slowly, we have a saying. Kotoba wa kokoro no tsukai. Words are the messengers of the heart. Your waitress, she spoke with her heart. She didn't just know our language, she knew our feeling. This tells us something about your company. Sarah, who had been silent throughout the entire exchange, finally spoke up. May I ask what Takahashi-san said to her, initially I mean, that started the conversation? Nakamura-san smiled slightly. He said, this city is too loud, and the coffee is too weak. He was not expecting an answer, certainly not in Japanese, and absolutely not in the dialect of his childhood. What did she say back? David asked. He said, in Tokyo, we make the coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and the city is loud with the right kind of noise, the noise of living, not just existing. Then she asked if he missed the sound of the morning trains. James laughed, an honest sound of surprise. And does he? Every day, Takahashi-san said in careful English, his first words in their language all afternoon. Every single day. Maya Kimura had learned early that invisibility was a survival skill. When you were a server, a cleaner, a person whose job was to facilitate other people's comfort, the best thing you could be was efficient and forgettable. Take the order, deliver the food, refill the water, clear the plates, accept the tip with a smile that never quite reached your eyes. Don't engage too much. Don't have opinions. Don't exist beyond the function you served. She perfected this disappearing act over 7 years of service work, starting with the diner near her college campus, where she'd slept through most of her shifts on her feet, then moving up to chain restaurants with better tips, and finally landing at Meridian Tower 3 years ago. Meridian paid better than anywhere she'd worked before. Catering to corporate clients meant bigger tabs and bigger tips, but it also required a more refined version of invisibility. Here, you weren't just forgettable, you were professionally invisible. A ghost in black and white who materialized with entrees and vanished with empty plates. Most days, Maya was good at it. Excellent, even. Her manager, Patricia, had called her reliably perfect during her last review, which was about as close to a compliment as Patricia got. She showed up on time, never called in sick, remembered regular clients' preferences, and navigated the complex social choreography of high-end service without breaking a sweat. She was 27 years old and had her routine down to a science.
Wake up at 5:30 a.m. in the studio apartment she could barely afford in a neighborhood the real estate listings generously called emerging. Run for 40 minutes through streets still dark and quiet, her breath visible in the autumn air, her footsteps echoing off closed storefronts. Shower, dress in the black slacks and white shirt that constituted her uniform, though she kept her actual work clothes in her locker at Meridian. Eat oatmeal while standing at her kitchen counter, which was really just an extension of the sink. Check her phone for messages she rarely received. Catch the 7:15 bus that would get her to Meridian by 8 a.m. for the morning setup. The bus ride was always the same. 40 minutes of watching the city transform from residential to commercial, from sleeping to waking. She usually sat in the back, earbuds in, listening to podcasts about linguistics or language acquisition, sometimes Japanese news programs, just to keep her ear sharp. The language was getting rustier the longer she stayed away from Tokyo, and she could feel it. Words that used to come easily now required a moment's thought. Phrases that used to flow naturally now felt rehearsed. She'd learned Japanese in college, where she'd been a linguistics major with dreams of becoming a translator or interpreter. Something professional, something that used her brain in ways that service work didn't. She'd been good at it too, good enough to win a scholarship for a study abroad program, good enough to extend that program into a 3-year stay, good enough to find work at a translation agency in Shibuya that paid barely enough to cover her tiny apartment, but felt like the beginning of something real. Then her mother got sick. Maya's mother, Catherine Kimura, had raised Maya alone after Maya's father, a Japanese businessman who'd returned to Tokyo when Maya was 2, disappeared from their lives. Catherine worked as a nurse for 37 years, pulling double shifts to pay for Maya's education, never complaining, always finding ways to make their small life feel full. When the cancer diagnosis came, aggressive and unforgiving, Maya had been sitting in a cafe in Shimokitazawa, editing a technical manual about semiconductor manufacturing and feeling frustrated about a deadline. She'd been on a plane within 24 hours. The treatments lasted 8 months. Catherine fought with the same quiet determination she'd brought to everything else in her life, and Maya sat beside her through every chemotherapy session, every radiation appointment, every conversation with doctors who spoke in probabilities and percentages. They beat it, eventually. Catherine went into remission, but the medical bills were crushing, and Maya's savings, modest to begin with, were completely gone. She'd planned to return to Tokyo, to her job, to the life she'd been building, but her mother's insurance wouldn't cover the ongoing monitoring appointments, and someone needed to make sure the bills got paid. So Maya stayed. She took the first job she could find that offered decent money and flexible hours. She told herself it was temporary, a few months, maybe a year, just to get her mother stable and the debt under control. That was 4 years ago. Now, Catherine lived in a senior apartment complex on the other side of the city, healthy but lonely, and the debt had transformed from medical bills into credit card balances that Maya chipped away at with all the progress of trying to empty an ocean with a teaspoon. The translation agency in Tokyo had filled her position. Her apartment in Shimokitazawa had been rented to someone else. The life she'd been building had been dismantled piece by piece, and in its place was this: early mornings and late nights, sore feet and fixed smiles, tips counted and bills paid, and nothing left over for dreams. Maya didn't let herself think about it most days. Thinking about it made her hands shake and her chest tight, so she focused on the routine, on the small satisfactions of doing her job well. She memorized regular customers' names and preferences. She perfected the art of being present but invisible. She saved whatever she could, though the number in her savings account grew with painful slowness. And she spoke Japanese to herself sometimes, late at night in her apartment, just to keep it alive. She'd narrate her activities in Tokyo dialect, the way Mrs. Hayashi, her elderly landlady, had taught her. Sa, ocha o ilemashou. Now then, let's make some tea. Kyou mo ganbatta ne. You worked hard today, too. Small phrases, domestic and ordinary, that made her apartment feel less empty. Her friends from college had mostly drifted away, absorbed into careers and relationships and cities she couldn't afford to visit. She dated sporadically over the years, but nothing stuck. How do you explain to someone that you were 27 and supposed to be building a career, but instead you were serving lunch to people who made more in a month than you made in a year? How do you explain that you had a whole different life once, in a country across the ocean, and you missed it with an ache that never quite went away? So she didn't explain. She just kept moving, kept working, kept being professionally invisible. The morning of the Morrison & Associates meeting had started like any other. Maya had arrived at 8 a.m. to find Patricia already there, reviewing the day's reservations with the intensity of a general planning a battle campaign.
"Private dining room, noon," Patricia had said, not looking up from her tablet. "Morrison & Associates, high-stakes client lunch, Japanese investors. They've requested wine pairings and specifically asked for no music. Apparently, it's distracting. I need you on this one, Maya." Maya had nodded, already running through her mental checklist. Private rooms required more attention to detail. You couldn't just drop off food and disappear. You needed to be attentive but not intrusive, present but not hovering. It was a delicate balance. "VIP protocol," Patricia continued. "Morrison's been working on this partnership for months. Everything needs to be perfect, and I mean everything. If one of them even looks like they need water, you're there with the pitcher. Understand?" "Understood." Patricia finally looked up, her sharp eyes assessing. "You're good with this kind of thing. You don't get flustered. That's why I'm putting you on it instead of Derek." Derek was the other server who usually handled private dining rooms, a guy in his 30s who was always talking about his screenplay and treated service work like a tragic detour on his way to Hollywood. Maya had nothing against him personally, but she appreciated Patricia's confidence in her, even if it was delivered in Patricia's characteristically blunt manner. The morning shift passed in its usual rhythm. Maya prepped the private dining room, making sure every glass was spotless, every piece of silverware aligned, every napkin folded into perfect triangles. She reviewed the menu, noting which items took longer to prepare, which dietary restrictions might come up, which wines paired with which entrees. She checked her appearance in the bathroom mirror. Hair neat, shirt pressed, name tag straight, face composed in the expression of pleasant neutrality that was her work face. By 11:45 a.m., she was ready. The dining room was perfect. She was invisible and prepared. She hadn't expected anyone to speak Japanese. In 7 years of service work, she occasionally encountered Japanese customers, business people, tourists, families, but the conversations were always transactional and in English. Most Japanese people who came to an American restaurant spoke English well enough for ordering purposes, and most seemed to prefer it, defaulting to the language of the country they were visiting. Maya had never presumed to speak Japanese to them unless they addressed her first in that language, which they never did. To do otherwise felt presumptuous, like showing off. So when Takahashi-san had made that comment, "Kono machi wa urusai sugite, kohi wa uso sugiru," this city is too loud and the coffee is too weak, she'd almost let it pass. It was clearly a private comment to his colleague, not meant for the server. The professional thing would be to pretend she hadn't understood. But something in his tone had caught her. Not just the words, but the way he'd said them. The particular rhythm and intonation of Shitamashi dialect, the old neighborhoods of eastern Tokyo, the accent of merchants and craftspeople, of narrow streets and family businesses passed down through generations, her landlady's accent, the accent of the neighborhood where Maya had felt, for the first time since childhood, like she belonged somewhere. Before she could stop herself, she'd responded, "Tokyo de wa shinnin mo me ga sameru kurai tsuyoi kohi o ireru shi, machi no soon mo ikiteru oto da yo ne. Tada sonzai shiteru dake ja nakute." In Tokyo, we make the coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and the city is loud with the right kind of noise. The noise of living, not just existing. The moment the words left her mouth, she'd felt a flash of panic. She'd broken character. She'd stopped being invisible. Patricia would probably hear about this, and Maya would get a lecture about maintaining professional boundaries, about not inserting herself into client conversations. But then, Takahashi-san had looked up at her, really looked up at her, and smiled. Not a polite business smile, but something genuine. And he'd asked, "Asa no densha no oto ga koishii kai?" Do you miss the sound of the morning trains? And just like that, Maya wasn't in a corporate dining room anymore. She was back in her tiny apartment in Shimokitazawa, lying on her futon in the early morning, listening to the distant rumble of the Keio Inogashira line as it carried people toward Shibuya. She was sitting in Mrs. Hayashi's kitchen, helping to peel daikon, while the old woman told stories about the neighborhood before the war. She was walking through the narrow shopping street on Funday mornings when the vendors called out their specials, and the smell of grilled fish mixed with fresh mochi and the sharp citrus of yuzu. Mainichi koishii desu. I miss it every day. The conversation that followed was unlike anything Maya had experienced at work. Takahashi-san had asked where in Tokyo she had lived, and when she told him Setagaya-ku near Shimokitazawa, his whole face had changed. That was his neighborhood too, he explained through a mix of Japanese and English. He'd grown up 3 streets over from where Maya had lived. He knew the bakery on the corner that made the best melon pan. He remembered when the station was renovated in the 1980s. He asked if the old ramen shop near the north exit was still there, and Maya had to tell him it had closed 2 years before she arrived, but there was a new place that the locals said was even better, even though everyone complained about the change.
Nakamura-san and Yoshida-san had joined in, and suddenly Maya was having a real conversation, the kind where you forgot you were at work, where you weren't performing a role but just being yourself. They asked about her landlady, and Maya found herself describing Mrs. Hayashi with genuine affection, her strict insistence on proper Japanese, her love of enka music, her tendency to leave small gifts of food outside Maya's door because she didn't think Maya was eating enough. "She sounds like my grandmother," Yoshida-san had said with a laugh, "always worried about food, always sure that young people today don't eat properly." When Takahashi-san showed her pictures of his grandchildren, Maya had felt a pang of recognition. They looked like the kids she used to see in the neighborhood, at the park near her apartment where families gathered on weekends. She asked their ages, their interests. Takahashi-san's face had softened as he talked about them, the formal businessman persona completely gone. It was only when she left to put in their order that Maya remembered where she was and what she was supposed to be doing. Her heart was racing. Her carefully maintained professional invisibility had shattered completely. She'd spoken freely, expressed opinions, shared personal stories, everything Patricia had always told her not to do. In the kitchen, she placed the order with trembling hands. The chef, Marco, looked at her curiously. "You okay? You look flushed." "Fine," Maya said quickly. "Just warm in there." But she wasn't fine. She was exhilarated and terrified in equal measure. She'd broken every rule of service work. Don't get personal. Don't dominate the conversation. Don't make yourself the center of attention. And she had no idea what the consequences would be. Would the Morrison people complain? Would Patricia fire her? Would this be the end of the job she'd been depending on for 3 years? But underneath the fear was something else. Something that felt like waking up after a long sleep. For 15 minutes, Maya had been Maya Kimimura, who lived in Tokyo, who spoke Japanese fluently, who belonged to a community and a culture. Not Maya the invisible server, not Maya who had given up her dreams. Just Maya. When she returned to the dining room with their entrees, the investors greeted her warmly. Takahashi-san asked if she'd tried a particular restaurant in Kichijoji, and she had. It had been one of her favorites. They talked about it while she set down plates, about the tiny garden in the back and the owner's cat who sat in the window. The Morrison executives watched this exchange with expressions that ranged from bewildered to intrigued. After she left the dining room the second time, she stood in the hallway for a moment, trying to steady her breathing. Through the door, she could hear conversation, animated now in a way it hadn't been when she'd first entered. She heard laughter. She heard the clink of glasses, a toast being made. Patricia found her there. "Maya, what's going on in that room?" Maya's heart sank. Here it came. "I'm sorry if I—" "Sorry?" Patricia's severe expression cracked into something almost resembling approval. "Morrison's assistant just texted me. Apparently, you saved their entire deal. They want to know if you're available to attend the contract signing next week as an interpreter." Maya stared at her. "As what?" "An interpreter? You speak Japanese, don't you? Apparently you made quite an impression on the investors. They're saying they want you there to help facilitate communication. Morrison's willing to pay a consultant fee on top of your regular wages." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "You never told me you spoke Japanese." "It never came up." "Well, it's come up now. They want an answer by end of day. You interested?" Maya's mind was racing. An interpreter. Consultant fees. This was closer to the work she'd been trained for than anything she'd done in 4 years. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, I'm interested." Patricia nodded briskly. "Good. Finish your shift. I'll get you the details tomorrow." She walked away, leaving Maya standing in the hallway trying to process what had just happened. Through the dining room door, she could still hear voices, relaxed and warm. The kind of voices people used when walls came down, when business became relationship, when strangers became something approaching friends. Maya had spent 4 years perfecting invisibility, and in 15 minutes, she'd become visible again. The question was, what would she do with it? That night, in her studio apartment, Maya sat cross-legged on her bed with her phone in her hands. She'd been staring at the same contact for 20 minutes, Kenji Sato, her former supervisor at the translation agency in Tokyo. She'd guessed his number all these years, but had never found the courage to call. What would she say? That she'd abandoned the career he'd helped her build? That she was serving lunch to people while her linguistics degree gathered dust?
But tonight felt different. Tonight, she'd spoken Japanese like she used to. Tonight, she'd been the person she was before everything fell apart. Her fingers moved before she could overthink it, typing out a message. Sato-san, this is Maya Kimura. I know it's been a long time. I'm still in the US, but something happened today that made me think of you. I miss the work we did together. I miss Tokyo. I hope you're well. She hit send before she could delete it, then set the phone down and covered her face with her hands. It was a small thing, a message, but it felt like cracking open a door she'd sealed shut. Her phone buzzed almost immediately. She picked it up with shaking hands. Kimura-san, what a surprise. Of course I remember you. You were one of our best translators. We missed you when you left. Are you considering a return to the field? Maya's eyes blurred with unexpected tears. She wiped them away and typed back, maybe? I don't know. It's complicated. Life often is, but your talent doesn't disappear even when circumstances change. If you ever want to talk about possibilities, my door is always open. She set the phone down and looked around her apartment. It was a small and sparse one. A bed, a desk, a kitchenette, a single window that looked out at the building next door. For 4 years, this had been enough. Safety, stability, survival. But survival wasn't enough anymore. She thought about Takahashi-san's face when she'd spoken in Shitamachi dialect, the way his expression had transformed from polite business distance to genuine warmth, the way he'd shown her pictures of his grandchildren like she was someone who mattered, not just a server taking his order. She thought about Mrs. Hayashi, who had been dead for 2 years now. She'd learned about it through a Facebook post from another neighbor, Mrs. Hayashi's daughter, posting about the funeral, about how many people from the neighborhood had come. Maya had been halfway round the world, serving lunch at Meridian, when the woman who had taught her to speak like a real Tokyoite, who had treated her like family, had died. She'd never gotten to say goodbye, never gotten to say thank you, never gotten to tell Mrs. Hayashi that those 3 years in that tiny apartment, learning to navigate a city and a language and a culture, had been the time when Maya had felt most like herself. Maya pulled out her laptop, an old model, scratched and slow but functional, and opened a new document. She titled it Languages I Speak and started writing. Japanese, Fluent, JLPT N1 certification, 3 years residency in Tokyo, specialized in technical and business translation. English, native, professional communication, customer service, hospitality industry. Spanish, conversational, high school and college courses, regular practice. It was a resume. She hadn't updated hers in 4 years. Just looking at the blank page made her feel dizzy with possibility and terror. But she kept writing. Education, bachelor's degree in linguistics, minor in East Asian studies. Experience, translation agency in Tokyo, freelance interpretation, and yes, even the service work. Customer relations, high-pressure situations, cultural sensitivity. She worked until 2 a.m., until her eyes burned and her fingers cramped. When she finally saved the document and closed her laptop, she felt exhausted and awake in equal measure. Tomorrow she would serve lunch at Meridian. She would be professional and invisible because that was still her job, still what paid the bills. But next week, she would sit in a contract signing as an interpreter. She would use the skills she thought she'd lost. She would be visible, And maybe, just maybe, that door she'd cracked open tonight would lead somewhere. Maybe not back to Tokyo. Her life was here now. Her mother was here. The debts were still real. But maybe to a version of herself that hadn't been fully buried under 4 years of survival mode. She set her phone on the nightstand and lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling. The apartment was silent, except for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional creak of pipes. In Tokyo, there had always been sound. Trains, voices, a click of bicycles passing. Mrs. Hayashi's television through the thin walls playing enka music at precisely 7 p.m. every evening. She missed that noise. The noise of living, not just existing.
Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Kenji Sato. By the way, we're expanding our U.S. operations. Opening an office in your city, actually. We'll need local translators with Japanese expertise. No promises, but if you're interested, I could connect you with the team lead. Think about it. Maya read the message 3 times, her heart hammering. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she got up and went to the small closet where she kept the few boxes of things from Tokyo she hadn't been able to part with. She pulled out a photo album. Its cover decorated with pressed flowers she and Mrs. Hayashi had collected from the neighborhood. The first photos showed Maya at 23, standing outside her apartment building in Shimokitazawa. She looked young and hopeful, her hair longer than, her smile unguarded. Behind her, you could see the narrow street, the bicycle racks, the shop signs in kanji and hiragana. Mrs. Hayashi had taken the photo on Maya's first day in the apartment, insisting on documenting the occasion. She flipped through the pages. Maya at a cherry blossom viewing party in Inokashira Park, surrounded by colleagues from the translation agency. Maya at a summer festival, wearing a borrowed yukata, eating kakigori. Maya in Mrs. Hayashi's kitchen, both of them laughing at something, flour on their hands from making gyoza. The last photo was of Mrs. Hayashi alone, standing in her doorway, one hand raised in farewell. Maya had taken it the day she left for the airport, when her mother's diagnosis had turned her life inside out. Mrs. Hayashi had been crying, but trying not to show it. "You'll come back," she'd said in Japanese. "When things are settled, you'll come back." "I will," Maya had promised. "I will." But she hadn't. Life had kept happening, one crisis after another, 1 month turning into 12, turning into 48. And now Mrs. Hayashi was gone, and that promise remained broken. Maya closed the album and held it against her chest. She couldn't go back. Time only moved in one direction. But maybe she could go forward. Maybe that was enough. The next morning, Maya awoke at 5:30 a.m. as usual, but instead of immediately starting her routine, she lay in bed for an extra 10 minutes and did something she hadn't done in years. She planned. Not just for the day, but for the future. She would work her shift at Meridian. She would do the interpretation job next week and do it well enough that Morrison & Associates might consider her for future work. She would respond to Kenji Sato's message about the U.S. office expansion. She would update her resume and send it out. She would stop treating her linguistics degree like a failure and start treating it like a tool she'd temporarily set aside. And most importantly, she would visit her mother this weekend and actually talk to her. Not just the surface conversation they usually had. "How are you feeling?" "Fine." "How's work?" "Fine." But a real conversation about what Maya wanted, about what she'd given up, about whether it was possible to build a different kind of life while still being there for the people you loved. Her mother had never asked Maya to sacrifice her career. That had been Maya's choice, made in the fog of crisis and fear. Catherine had been grateful for the help during treatment, but she'd also said more than once, "Don't let me be the reason you stop living, sweetheart." Maya had ignored that advice for 4 years. Maybe it was time to listen. She went for her run, the autumn air sharp in her lungs. The city was just beginning to wake up. Delivery trucks making their rounds, a few early commuters at the bus stops. the sky lightening from black to deep blue. She ran her usual route, but today she noticed things she normally missed. A garden someone had planted in front of a corner store, bright with late-season flowers. A mural on the side of a building, painted in colors that caught the rising sun. A coffee shop she'd never been to, its windows glowing with warm light. There were small beauties everywhere if you paid attention. She'd forgotten that. At Meridian, Patricia was waiting with details about the interpretation job. Next Thursday, 2 p.m., conference room on 42. You'll need business attire, not the uniform. Morrison's assistant will email you the documents to review beforehand. Technical stuff about manufacturing partnerships, distribution agreements. You're comfortable with that vocabulary? Yes, Maya said, feeling a flutter of nervousness and excitement. Patricia studied her with those sharp eyes. You're full of surprises, Maya. 4 years you've worked here, and I had no idea you had this background. Didn't seem relevant. Didn't seem relevant, Patricia repeated, shaking her head. You've got a college degree in linguistics and 3 years of professional translation experience, and you didn't think that was worth mentioning. Maya didn't have a good answer for that. The truth was complicated. She'd been so focused on being invisible, on just getting through each day, that she'd convinced herself her past didn't matter, that who she used to be was someone else entirely.
Well, it's relevant now, Patricia continued. And between you and me, if this goes well, it could lead to more opportunities. We get international clients all the time who need interpretation services. Could be a nice side income for you. Side income. The words hung in the air, full of possibility. Side income meant additional savings. It meant breathing room. It meant maybe, just maybe, a way to start building something new while still maintaining the stability she needed. I'd like that, Maya said quietly. The shift passed normally, but Maya felt different. She moved through her tasks with the same efficiency as always, but there was something new underneath. A sense of purpose, of moving towards something rather than just moving away from crisis. During her break, she sat in the employee lounge and responded to Kenji Sato's message. I would very much like to hear more about the U.S. office expansion. Thank you for thinking of me. His response came within an hour. Excellent. I'll make the introduction. The team lead's name is Jennifer Okazaki. She is American-born but lived in Japan for 15 years. I think you two will get along well. Expect an email from her by end of week. Maya stared at the message, almost unable to believe this was happening. Yesterday she'd been going through the motions. Today doors were opening. It felt surreal, like the universe was responding to some question she hadn't known she was asking. But she knew the feeling wouldn't last unless she took action. So during her lunch break, she went to the business center on the building's 5th floor, a small room with computers available for public use, and spent 30 minutes polishing her resume. She made it honest. Yes, she'd spent 4 years in hospitality, but she framed it as customer relations, cultural liaison work, high-pressure service. She highlighted her language skills, her translation experience, her understanding of both American and Japanese business culture. When she hit save, she felt a shift inside herself. This was real. This was happening. Thursday arrived faster than Maya expected. She woke up that morning with her stomach in knots, the kind of nervous energy she hadn't felt since her first day at the translation agency in Tokyo. She'd spent the previous 3 days reviewing the documents Patricia had forwarded. Dense contracts full of manufacturing specifications, distribution timelines, profit-sharing arrangements. The vocabulary was technical, but it came back to her more easily than she'd expected. Her brain seemed to wake up, firing connections that had been dormant for years. She dressed carefully in the one business suit she owned, a charcoal gray that she'd bought for her mother's meetings with doctors and had barely worn since. It still fit well, professional and understated. She pulled her hair back into a neat bun and applied minimal makeup. When she looked in the mirror, she saw someone who looked like they belonged in a conference room, not a dining room. At Meridian, she clocked in and went straight to Patricia's office. I'm here for the Morrison meeting. Patricia looked up and gave an approving nod. Good. You look professional. Remember, your job is to facilitate communication, not participate in negotiation. Translate accurately, stay neutral, and if there's any confusion, ask for clarification rather than guessing. Got it? Got it. And Maya? Patricia's expression softened slightly. You've got this. You know what you're doing. Maya nodded, trying to absorb the confidence Patricia was offering. Thank you. The 42nd floor felt different when she arrived as an interpreter rather than a server. The receptionist treated her with a kind of professional courtesy that Maya wasn't used to, offering coffee and directing her to wait in a small conference room adjacent to the main one. Through the glass walls, she could see people setting up, arranging papers, testing the projector, adjusting chairs. James Morrison appeared, looking older than he had at lunch, but more relaxed. Maya, thank you for doing this. I know it's outside your usual role. I'm happy to help, Maya said, shaking his offered hand. The investors specifically requested you, James continued. Takahashi-san said he trusts your understanding of both languages and cultures. That's high praise from him. He's not usually so forthcoming with compliments. Maya felt a flush of pride. I'll do my best not to disappoint. I'm sure you won't. James glanced toward the door as Marcus Chen entered, followed by Sarah Kim and David Reeves. They all nodded at Maya with varying degrees of recognition. Ready for this? Marcus asked, though his tone was friendly rather than challenging. Ready, Maya confirmed.
When Takahashi-san, Nakamura-san, and Yoshida-san arrived, they greeted Maya warmly, bowing and smiling. Takahashi-san said something in Japanese that made her smile. He says you look very professional today, Nakamura-san translated, though Maya had already understood. Not like a waitress who saves failing business meetings. Maya laughed. Tell him I'll try to save this one too. The meeting began, and Maya slipped into a rhythm she'd almost forgotten. English to Japanese, Japanese to English, back and forth like breathing. She stood slightly to the side, notebook in hand for any terms that needed clarification, and became a conduit. When Marcus presented revised contract terms, Maya translated not just the words, but the tone, his enthusiasm, his careful emphasis on certain points, his openness to discussion. When Takahashi-san raised concerns about distribution timelines, Maya made sure the worry in his voice came through in English, so Marcus understood the weight of the issue. It was more than vocabulary. It was context, implication, the things that lived between words. When Yoshida-san used a particular phrase that was polite but contained subtle reservation, Maya didn't just translate it literally. She said, Mr. Yoshida is expressing some concern about this approach, though he's open to hearing more details. Marcus caught on quickly. Maya, can you ask him what specifically concerns him? I want to address it directly. Maya asked, and Yoshida-san explained at length. Something about timing and market readiness that he hadn't felt comfortable bringing up before. Maya translated it all, and Marcus nodded thoughtfully. That's a valid concern, Marcus said. Here's what we're thinking. The meeting flowed. Not perfectly, there were moments of confusion, technical terms that required discussion, cultural nuances that needed explanation, but it flowed. Maya could feel the difference her presence made. She wasn't just translating words, she was building bridges. During a break, Takahashi-san approached her with green tea. Someone had thoughtfully provided it, probably at his request. Anata no okage de honto no kaiwa ga dekiteiru. Because of you, we're having a real conversation, he said. It's important work, Maya replied in Japanese. I'm honored to help. You said you lived in Tokyo for 3 years. Why did you leave? Maya hesitated. She told him the basic story at lunch, but not the full weight of it. My mother was sick. I came back to take care of her. Understanding flickered in Takahashi-san's eyes. And now? Now she's healthy. But I stayed here. But your heart is still there, in Shimokitasawa. It wasn't a question, but Maya nodded anyway. Part of it, yes. Hearts can live in more than one place, Takahashi-san said gently. This is not a bad thing. It makes us bigger, not smaller. Before Maya could respond, Marcus called them back to continue. But Takahashi-san's words stayed with her throughout the rest of the meeting, echoing in the space between translations. The contract signing happened at 4:30 p.m., after 3 hours of discussion, revision, and negotiation. Everyone signed their portions with the gravity of people who understood they were building something lasting. Maya watched, still translating occasional comments, feeling like she was part of something significant. When it was done, James Morrison shook hands with each of the investors, and Takahashi-san gave a short speech in Japanese that Maya translated. This partnership is built on more than business. It is built on understanding, on respect, on the recognition that we are not so different despite the ocean between us. We look forward to working together. Everyone applauded, and Marcus turned to Maya. Thank you, seriously. We couldn't have done this without you. I was just translating, she said, though she knew it wasn't quite true. You were doing much more than that, Sarah Kim interjected. You were helping us actually understand each other. After the Japanese investors left, with promises to return next month for follow-up meetings, James Morrison pulled Maya aside. I know Patricia handles your scheduling at Meridian, but I want to make a separate arrangement with you. We're going to need ongoing interpretation support for this partnership. Monthly meetings, email correspondence, occasional video calls. Would you be interested in contract work? We'd pay your professional rate, not your server rate. Maya's breath caught. Yes, absolutely yes.
Good. I'll have our HR department reach out with details. And Maya, James smiled. You've got real talent. Don't hide it under a busboy's apron. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak without her voice shaking. On the bus ride home that evening, Maya sat in her usual spot in the back and allowed herself to feel it. Pride, excitement, hope. She'd done something she was good at, something that mattered, something that used her brain and her skills, and the years she'd spent building a life in Tokyo. Her phone buzzed. An email from an address she didn't recognize. Jennifer Okazaki, the team lead for the translation agency's U.S. expansion. The subject line read, Introduction from Kenji Sato. Maya opened it with trembling hands. Dear Ms. Kimura, Kenji has told me about your background, and I'm impressed. We're building a team here and looking for translators who understand both language and culture at a deep level. Would you be available for a phone interview next week? No pressure, just an exploratory conversation. But I think you might be exactly the kind of person we need. Best regards, Jennifer Okazaki. Maya read it 3 times, then a 4th. Then she closed her eyes and let her head rest against the window, feeling the vibration of the bus engine, feeling her heart beat steady and strong. This morning she'd been a server. Tonight, she was a professional interpreter with 2 job prospects. Tomorrow, who knew what she might become? When she got home, she didn't change into her usual comfortable clothes and collapse on the couch. Instead, she stayed in her suit and called her mother. Maya, is everything okay? Catherine answered with the slight worry that always entered her voice during unexpected calls. Everything's fine, Mom. Better than fine. Can I come over this weekend? I want to talk to you about something. Of course, sweetheart. You can come any time. What's this about? Maya smiled. About the future. About what I want. About maybe building something new? There was a pause, and when Catherine spoke again, her voice was warm with understanding. I've been waiting 4 years for you to say something like that. Come Saturday. I'll make your favorite dinner, and we'll talk. After they hung up, Maya finally changed out of the suit and into jeans and a soft sweater. She made tea, green tea imported from Japan that she'd been hoarding for special occasions. She sat at her small desk and opened her laptop.
She had a phone interview to prepare for, a professional rate to research, a conversation with her mother to plan, a life to start building. The studio apartment looked the same as it had yesterday, small, sparse, a way station rather than a home. But Maya looked at it differently now, not as a prison or a punishment, but as a starting point. Everyone had to start somewhere. Mrs. Hayashi used to say, "Ippozutsu," one step at a time. It was how you climbed mountains, how you learned languages, how you rebuilt lives that had fallen apart. Maya had taken the first step. Tomorrow, she'd take another. And eventually, she'd find herself somewhere she'd never imagined. Somewhere that was neither Tokyo nor this studio apartment, but some new place entirely. A place she'd built herself. One step, one word, one bridge at a time. Saturday arrived with clear skies and the sharp scent of autumn. Maya took the bus across the city to her mother's apartment, carrying a box of mochi from the Japanese market she rarely let herself visit, too expensive, too painful a reminder of Tokyo. Catherine opened the door with flour on her hands. She said, "I'm making pot roast, your grandmother's recipe. Come help me with the potatoes." They worked side by side in the small kitchen, and Maya told her everything. Not just about the interpretation work and the job prospects, but about the 4 years of feeling frozen, of choosing safety over dreams because she'd been too afraid to want anything. Her mother set down her peeling knife. "Maya, sweetheart, I never wanted to be your excuse." "You weren't an excuse. You were sick. I needed to be here." "You did, and I'm grateful. But, Catherine, I'm healthy now, and you're still here, still serving lunch, still acting like wanting more makes you selfish. It doesn't."
Maya's eyes filled. "I don't know if I can do it. Build something new. What if I fail?" "Then you fail. But you'll fail doing something you love, speaking languages you love, being the person you actually are." Catherine smiled. "That's better than succeeding at being invisible." The phone interview with Jennifer Okazaki happened Tuesday morning. Maya sat in her apartment, notes spread across her desk, and spoke about translation theory, cultural mediation, the poetry of finding equivalent meanings across languages. Jennifer hired her on a trial contract, 10 hours a week to start, with possibility for more. Marcus called that afternoon. Morrison and Associates wanted her for monthly interpretation work. Maya gave Patricia her 2 weeks' notice, not out of anger, but because she needed the space to become someone else, someone visible. On her last shift, she walked through Meridian's dining room one final time, not disappearing, but leaving. Outside, the city hummed with the noise of living.